My position on the extent to which we are adequately preparing students for practice is not that we're perfect. There's actually a lot that still needs to be done, I think, to make it better. I think we've taken a lot of the strides at Stanford that have begun that process, but we still have more to do as well. And I think in general, there's a lot more to do. But the criticisms are just, misplaced. Most of them really seem to be coming from where law schools were 30 years ago, and we've made enormous strides. And I do think it's important to understand that point because you'll get a much better response from law schools if you take them from where they are actually today and recognize the extent to which not just Stanford, but lots of law schools have been thinking hard about and beginning to address what it is that we need to do professionally. The job market is interesting. I mean, it's been very much in flux in lots of different ways since the economy collapsed. Really earlier, I mean, if you think of the job market of the 80s and 90s as having been relatively continuous and growing continuously, although not hugely, then the early decades of the early years rather after 2000, it was a bubble. It was a bubble in the economy and it was a bubble in the legal profession as well. And then the bubble popped. And so that both were dislocations of a sort. There were the bubble burst and jobs got harder to find. Now, we've done well. I mean, basically our job outcomes have not changed in terms of the overall class. We've been able to place virtually everybody in our class. In any given year, there may be a tiny handful, usually got them on one finger, of students who don't have jobs when they graduate, although they will also get jobs usually before long. It takes more work. The number of options have changed. It used to be you could generate 5, 10 offers with little effort. Now, with some effort, you can generate 2 or 3 offers, but students are still finding work that they like. And that's really the important thing. The biggest the private market dislocation turned out to be relatively short term. So, to some extent, the way I look at it is the job market is in the way back where it was or would have been had there never been a bubble in the first place. And that's on the private market side, and so that's okay. The dislocation on the public interest and government side, on the other hand, is much bigger and much more profound. And I don't know whether that's going to go away soon because we're looking at budgets have been cut, stimulus money is gone. It doesn't look like government is going to be growing very quickly. There is this irony, which is legal services seem to be high on the list of things that can be cut quick when you need to cut your budgets. Philanthropic support for non-governmental public interest organizations has retreated significantly. And so we're looking at a pretty significant cutback there, which means it takes a lot of effort. And it already took a lot of effort to find students who are looking for jobs in the public interest or government, sectors, positions. And that, again, it takes work. The school is deeply committed and small enough that we can really work individually with every single student. And we do that. And so we're able to help them. So it was clear from talking to alumni and people in the profession, that there was a pretty significant and growing mismatch between what we were doing and what their needs were. The economic collapse had nothing to do with it. I mean, it to some extent speeded up some changes that were already happening in the profession, but it was already happening. Training was diminishing. We needed to provide, within the firm, training was diminishing. We needed to provide students with more opportunities to develop skills that they needed that were still intellectual skills and so on. It was all there, in other words. And so we just started to make the changes because they were clearly the right thing to do educationally. I hope it's a very different program 7 or 8 years later, while preserving the core. The core of what was always good about Stanford, which was a really tremendously focused ability to do legal analytic thinking, and a great first-year program, and then a lot of intellectual interest in the second and third year while you add on. So I think we've tried to preserve all that, but just give students additional opportunities with the time that they have to develop the other dimensions that will make them a good lawyer. And so, again, there was no thinking at the beginning that, we need to change this a lot. Everything just kind of emerged organically. I often think of it, it's like the common law. When you do common law reasoning, you have a lot of individual case results, and you try and tell a story that puts them all together, or as many as you can. And then once you're done with that, the story itself takes on some power, and that's really the way it works. And it was similar here, talking to people, it was clear that there were a bunch of different data points that needed to be addressed, and there was a story that made them all cohere together. And once you told that story, it took on a life of its own, and everything else followed. So there's a way in which I suppose with all the changes in the profession that were beginning, as I say, they started before the economic downturn, it was time to rethink legal education. It hadn't changed significantly, since the late 19th century. But again, it was all much more organic than you'd think, and things just followed as making sense. To a large extent, actually the heart of the reformed curriculum is the interdisciplinary piece, and the idea was traditional analytical legal thinking, which is primarily a process of problem spotting, is essential. It's foundational, but any lawyer needs to actually be able to help his or her client solve the problems affirmatively. So just being able to identify the legal risks for them is really only a piece of what you need to provide. And there's no generic problem-solving skill. The problems depend on the kind of lawyer you are. And the rest of the university is training the future lawyers in the problem-solving skills that they need to solve their problems, so that the actual best way to prepare someone is to give them the same kind of education with the same kind of people that they're going to be working with. So the interdisciplinary program gives them really sophisticated problem-solving skills taught by faculty and with students who are among the best in the world in all of those fields, so that when they get out and actually have to start working with and for them, they're really in a position to take their legal training and work closely with an understanding of what they do, that's what the client does. So I often refer to it as teaching people to think like a client, as well as how to think like a lawyer. And, part of the key there is the large debate about curriculum reform always gets framed as a choice between, being intellectual or a trade school. Mm-hmm. Trade school, connoting like just simple skills, how to file a paper and how to prepare a form. And the idea here is actually that's really not what we're doing. So although it is more oriented towards preparing people for the profession, it's layering on additional intellectual skills that they need that can't be learned easily in practice, but that it really can be taught well and better inside a university if you have the right people to teach it. Clinical education, there's no other discipline in which it's not a central part of the training that one gets. So, carefully supervised experiential learning is essential if you want to really prepare people to do something, whatever it is. That had been growing in law schools for a long time, although it's still retarded in a lot of ways by the sort of early roots of clinical education, which were not primarily pedagogical at the beginning, but really primarily social justice oriented. Stanford was in a position to actually build something not quite from scratch, but almost from scratch. And so, we could maintain all the good aspects of the early clinics, but develop something new, and that's what we did. And again, we did it with the idea initially that we should be able to afford that opportunity to everybody who wants it, and that we should try and encourage students to understand that every single one of them should want it. And that required developing a kind of program that, had a broad number of clinics that addressed different kinds of interests, that worked as a single entity so that they wouldn't just learn, in a silo in their own clinic, but would get exposure from all the other clinics. And as I say, it was just so obviously central to any kind of professional education that it became an important part of what we were doing. The key difference comes from the full-time aspect, which enables us to do a lot of things. But there's, actually a huge amount of variety among schools in the kinds of clinics. So lots of schools use partial externships as opposed to the full-time in-house clinic. So ours is heavily focused on the full-time in-house clinic. Mm-hmm. And then with that and the full-time aspect, we've been able to do things, as I say, more to get students exposed to work in the other clinics at the same time, more kinds of work within their clinic, a much more intensive experience. All of those things, I think, distinguish our clinics, as well as some of the particular clinics. We have clinics in a number of areas which operate somewhat uniquely. Our business clinic is quite different from what they do at most other schools, in that it's much more focused around the kind of work students are actually likely to do when they graduate from here, in terms of the business work that they do, board advisory work and that kind of thing, working with companies that have boards and so on. Same thing with the intellectual property clinic that we'll be launching. It's a public policy-oriented clinic that cuts across biotech, high-tech, cyber law, that really enables students to work in all those areas focused around the idea of innovation. There's lots of unique features within each of the clinics as well. We now have the capacity to run a clinic in which the entire class, as say 100% of the students, could take a clinic if they choose. A lot of the classes that we introduce, think of sets of classes that are actually part of everything. That is, say they're both interdisciplinary and clinical in orientation, in the sense that they're designed to take knowledge that the students will get either in law classes or in classes in other disciplines that is general, and give them opportunities to actually work with it. So a lot of the classes that we've introduced are actually organized around taking students from different disciplines, putting them into teams, and giving them problems to address. And courses like Designing Liberation Technology or the Scientific Evidence class, that's what they do. So they're capstone-ish in the sense that, they require the students to take that knowledge and figure out how to work with it while working with others. Demand for them is growing. It's growing all the time, and it's growing faster than we can create the classes. Although I still think we have a lot of room to create more, and that there'll be more and increasing demand as we go along. So one of the key things that essentially all lawyers do over the course of their career, in addition to working for individual clients, either on litigation or transactional work, is they'll almost all get involved to some extent, many to a very large extent, in doing policy work. And that can run the gamut from helping a client through a regulatory process or a notice and comment hearing process, to litigation with major public policy consequences, to lobbying for legislation. But it's something lawyers need to be prepared to do. And so we wanted to make that also part of the education. What's neat about it is not only something that they'll do, but the context in which we can teach them to do it also enhances some of the other things that we're trying to teach, including the interdisciplinary skills, the working in a team skills, and it's done in a context where what they're doing is very much a research and writing exercise, which is something else we wanted to develop. So it becomes a much more relevant and useful research and writing exercise than just doing a seminar paper. So it really brings a lot of things together while giving them real training in something that they're actually going to do after they get out of here, and in a context where they can have impact in the world right now with this work. SLS Navigator actually addresses two particular problems simultaneously. So one is just, students come, they spend their 3 years here, and then they go off into a practice. And the traditional way that people did law school was sort of liberal arts and law, and it didn't matter what you took, just took what interests you and take what interests you. And then, you go into practice and you'll wander around for a few areas and eventually figure it out. And that's actually a really poor model, given the modern context in which they actually graduate, where they're going to get assigned into a practice right away. So even though they're going to move probably through different practice areas over the course of their career, we want them to take control of their career right from the start. And that means helping them figure out what kind of law they're really interested in right from the start. And SLS Navigator, one of the things that it does is it's a tool to help them do that, because it's just got a ton of information, not just what courses are relevant, but why they're relevant, what lawyers in different kinds of practices do, and lots of other resources related to that area that, if just browsing it, will give you a lot of information to help you begin to figure out what seems really interesting and engaging to you. The second thing it does, of course, is to the extent that they do have ways in which they want to go, it gives them information on what they should do while they're here. But once you open up the curriculum the way we have and say, here's the whole university, think of the university as the law school. And if you're interested, here are a bunch of things that you need to do what you want to do in the world, some of which are taught in the law school, some of which are taught in other parts of the university. So where do you find those? What are they and where do you find them? And so once you've gotten, our curriculum now has available 1,800 classes that students can take through the whole university equally. And it's easy to get lost in that. So, they need significant advice and guidance on how to do it. So SLS Navigator is designed to do that, but it does it in a pretty unique way. So we wanted to give students, it's not just narrow, if you're interested in being a corporate lawyer, take the following courses. As I say, we tried to embed it in a broader set of information about the general practice. And so for every course, it'll tell you why it's relevant to the particular field, but it'll also tell you other kinds of areas, other kinds of practices, other kinds of careers as to which that same course is also relevant, and point you towards other resources to learn more. So you can really get a comprehensive set of information, and if you spend time with it, really begin to construct a curriculum using all of Stanford University that is well designed to give you a broad set of skills, much broader than just knowing how to think like a lawyer. I think the most unique feature of the Stanford students is that they're really entrepreneurial in the broad sense while they're here. That is to say, they don't just come here and do what they're told to do. They really come up with ideas for things that can be done, for ways that things can be done better, for other things they can do outside the law school that are related to building a professional identity. And that is a really unique feature of Stanford law students. I think historically it's been like that. And so as a result, the culture of the school has long been to encourage and support it. And as a result, it may be that we attract students who have that bent to start because that is our reputation. It may be that once they're here, they develop it because that is the culture, probably some mix of the two. But the net result is that, yeah, the students who are here start all sorts of things while they're here. And a lot of the most interesting and important initiatives that have been undertaken in the 8 years that I've been here, at least, were student initiated, whether it's the International Human Rights Clinic, all of our development projects in Afghanistan and Bhutan, and the like, the documentary film project, Building a Better Legal Profession, Ms. JD. There's just a ton of them. A lot of companies have come out of here. Codex, our Center on Law and Computers, constantly has students coming with ideas on how to improve legal informatics that we're going to try and help them develop into real products that may actually go out and do something in the world to make it better, and on and on and on. There are almost as many student organizations as there are students at this point. Just because there's so many things our students are interested in doing. There are claims about a glut of lawyers and that we have too many lawyers, and I find that a very peculiar claim. There is clearly a mismatch, but there's not too many lawyers. I mean, simultaneously, while we talk about having too many lawyers, the United States has one of the worst records in the world, certainly in the industrialized world, on access to justice. So there is a huge proportion of people out there with needs for legal assistance who aren't getting it. So there's not a glut of lawyers. As I said, it may be a mismatch, and that's what makes it all the more ironic to see all the cutbacks and the withdrawal of positions in the public interest and government sector, which address to a larger extent those people who have those needs. But no, I don't think we have too many lawyers in this country. I'm as optimistic about the legal profession as I am about the economy as a whole. So it will recover. I mean, the United States has a long tradition of robustness, in truth. So it takes some time. This time it's taking a little longer than we're used to, but it will unquestionably recover in the legal profession with it. And of course, I do believe, the globalization of the legal profession only really started in the 90s, after the Cold War ended. And what has been striking is the extent to which American and English law firms have dominated the globalization of legal practice. And I think that is because of something about legal training, the way we think about law and the way we teach people to think about law. So yes, I'm very optimistic because it's going to take the rest of the world a long time to catch up to what we do. And in the meantime, I think we're getting better at it.